Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat. Hello and welcome to episode 44 of India Rising, Strategic Affairs Conversation with Mohal and Kishor, a show in which we analyze the happenings from around the world and their impact on India. Today, we will be talking about the hottest topic in discussion right now around the world, and that is about the attack by Hamas on Israel and the subsequent counterattack by Israel on Hamas in Gaza. So, where did it all begin? It began with a coordinated attack by Hamas across various parts of Israel, primarily in South Israel. So, in the early hours of October 7, under the cover of a massive rocket barrage, and less than a day after Israel marked the somber 50th anniversary of the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War, hundreds of heavily armed Hamas fighters from the Gaza Strip penetrated Israel's border by land, air, and sea in the first invasion of its sovereign territory. Hamas executed a stunning military surprise, breaching the Israeli border in multiple ways and attacking more than 20 Israeli population centers and also military bases. Militants kidnapped dozens of Israelis, including children and the elderly, and captured military personnel. Israeli social media and news outlets filled with calls for help from families in the southern Israeli towns which were occupied by Hamas, sheltering in their homes as armed terrorists went door to door. The failure of the Israel intelligence and preparedness is second only to that of the 1973. Now, the attacks via land, air, and via sea, plus the information war of gruesome videos of hostages and innocent civilians being executed or kidnapped, hogged the limelight across all news on that day. Now, as the news broke, there were global reactions, and expectedly along predefined lines. Now, Qatar officially sided with Hamas, calling Israel responsible for today's terror attack in Israel. In fact, Qatar gave an issued a statement on that very same day. Similarly, Indian Prime Minister Modi also tweeted that day saying that he was deeply shocked by the news of terror attacks in Israel. Our thoughts and prayers are with the innocent victims and their families, and that India stands in solidarity with Israel at this difficult hour. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the same day also issued a statement saying that it was closely following the development of the unprecedented situation between a number of the Palestinian factions and the Israeli occupation forces, which had resulted in a high level of violence across several fronts. So, the global reaction, as I said, was along expected lines. Now, immediately after that, Israel uh, uh, arranged a hastily convened cabinet meeting. And at the end of that cabinet meeting, the government of Israel declared that it was entering a state of war against Hamas in Gaza. Now, as it did, it set a 24-hour deadline for all citizens in the northern part of Gaza to evacuate. In addition, Israel also shut off all electricity, water, fuel, and other goods that it supplied to Gaza on a regular basis. So, the stage was set for a major counterattack, and Hamas kind of stood their ground. Now, much of Hamas's strong position comes from the historical perspective of how it was able to upend not only Israel from Gaza, but also kind of push the Fatah or the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian Liberation Organization away from Gaza and kind of hijack the Palestinian cause or the Gazan cause uh, through their terror means. So, in a way, once the Second Intifada was defeated, the then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had taken a bold step by claiming that Israel would not only withdraw from the entire Gaza Strip and also put up a fence, hoping that it would leave the Palestinians there alone and that that kind of a measure would be reciprocated by the Gazan people. And we all know that it did not happen. In fact, in 2006, Hamas won elections in Gaza and soon consolidated its hold on the territory, pushing out Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah group. It saw the territory as a base from which it could prepare for a final clash with Israel and was soon accumulating weapons, including with Iranian help in rockets as well. So, in a way, we now had two power centers in Palestine, one in Gaza, headed by Hamas, and the other in the West Bank, in the Jordanian River West Bank, where Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah group was in power. And Israel um, kind of kept claiming that there were two power centers in Palestine. And even if we have to talk peace with Palestine, we don't know whom to talk with. So this intense power struggle would manifest in multiple ways through the year, and we will talk about that later. But as we know, Hamas would always try to upend their power over Fatah. Anyway, so once we had all that, we had the major players in the region like Iran, Saudi, and even Israel kind of having their own power play from time to time. So uh, while we know that there was this kind of a power play going on, there were also multiple attempts to end the rapprochement between the Israel and Arab states that had been started in earnest during the Trump administration. We all know that during the Trump administration, there was an Abraham Accord that was signed between Israel on one side, UAE and Bahrain on the other side, ably supported by a few more Islamic countries of the region. So, again, this initiative was pioneered and led by President Donald Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner. And the bargaining chip here was that the UAE and Bahrain would recognize the state of Israel for the very first time. Morocco and Sudan also, over the period of time, normalized their ties with Israel. Now, this was kind of the first time that this was happening, that the Arab nations had recognized the state of Israel, acknowledged the existence of Israel. Until now, it had not happened simply because the Arab nations had cited that the treatment of Palestinians by Israel was a reason that they would not recognize the Jewish state. Now, with the Abraham Accords being signed, the Palestinians opposed the agreement, fearing that their cause would be ignored. Indeed, as part of the Abraham Accords, uh, Jared Kushner, also tried to provide some kind of a monetary relief for Palestinian projects. And he said that he would kind of try to arrange around $50 billion, quite a hefty amount, now as part of some kind of a fundraising activity. But however, that did not happen simply because the Palestinians boycotted an investment conference that he had hosted in Bahrain in 2019. At the same time, a little after that, the Trump administration also moved the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Tel Aviv is on the Mediterranean coast. Jerusalem, as we all know, is kind of very close to the West Bank and claimed by the Palestinians as well. Now, this kind of a shifting of the US embassy had not been done by the previous administration simply because they deemed it to be too provocative to the Palestinians, who kept claiming not only parts of East Jerusalem but also the entirety of the culturally and historically important city of Jerusalem. Biden administration, on the other hand, largely continued the Trump administration's approach. In fact, the U.S. embassy still remains in Jerusalem, and the Biden team is now seeking to broker a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, if that materializes, this would totally help to reshape the Middle East even more than what the Abraham Accords ever managed. Now, this deal seems to have been moving forward in small but significant ways. Israeli planes now have overflight rights over the Saudi kingdom. An Israeli cabinet minister just recently, as recently as last month, visited the Saudi kingdom, the first time this had ever happened. And an Israeli official conducted a Jewish prayer service in Saudi Arabia last week. Last week prior to the attack. Again, this is something that had happened for the very first time. In fact, I had tweeted on the day of the Hamas attacks, and I read it verbatim now. Peace in Middle East is very fragile. It took two presidencies of Trump and Biden to work towards Abraham Accord, I2U2 summit, and the India Middle East Europe corridor by taking Saudi, UAE, Jordan, and Israel into confidence. It took one day of terror attacks by Iran backed Hamas deep inside Israel to undo all the good work. Saudi Arabia had been promised nukes since Iran was almost on the verge of having one for themselves. This is a pick your side moment in the Middle East. A decision now will have long term consequences either way. And that was what I had tweeted on that day. So, this is kind of a lengthy context background to what happened. Now, we'll delve into the military and security aspects. And Mohal, can you explain why Israel was kind of left flat-footed? They had no clue what was happening, and
Yeah.
essentially they were surprised.
Yeah. So before I delve into that, I wanted to like expand on your thought on the Iran, Saudi, Israel power play. So I think what had happened is that um, the Palestinians like had felt that they were being kind of left behind in this new world where
Yeah.
these new alliances were being stitched up. I mean, Israel thought that with its growing economy and its growing economic clout on the world stage, it can shape or forge new alliances and keep the the past, the history in the past, where geoeconomics triumphs like political causes. But unfortunately, these events have proven that it's not easy to wish away the Palestinian cause, and it has come again to the forefront. So, geoeconomics does matter in today's highly interconnected, developing world, but there are also limitations to it. And I think the Palestinians were feeling like they were being sold down the river, probably by not being included as part of these discussions because there was not a lot of mention of Palestine.
Yes.
And including, I think, recent statements by Saudis mentioned that they were like kind of on the back burner. So this would like a proxy move by Iran to ensure that like these it torpedoes the efforts of these normalization of relationship between Israel and the part of the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, while Palestine Authority rightly felt that they were being shortchanged here, and the fact that not only Bahrain but also UAE and Saudi were kind of taking a totally different path altogether. Iran, on the other hand, kind of kept upping the rhetoric, telling that we continue to stand for the Palestinians, we continue to fight for their cause. And I think this was an opportune moment for them to kind of do something big and also tell not only to Palestinians but also to the overall Muslim world at large to tell that we stand for Palestine nation and for the Palestine people,
And
and therefore
did
we
Qatar
are
also
the
do the same? Sorry to
uh,
interrupt, but did Qatar also do the same, or they were just housing the Hamas
they yeah.
leadership?
They just did that. I mean, I don't think they would have helped militarily, but definitely in other fronts they would have. So the point then is, who is the true representative of the Muslim community at large, global community, and that is where Iran tried to seize the moment for itself. Mohal?
Yeah. Yeah, so moving on to your earlier question, sorry for digressing there. Like, why was Israel surprised? Now, it's kind of interesting that like just 8 days before, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, and I quote, "The Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades." Um, End quote. So it seems that not only the Israelis were caught unprepared, but even like the United States and, I mean, by extension, the Five Eyes. I mean, I know like people are joking that like they were more interested in the so-called plumber like Niger, and they had more information on the plumber versus the such a big terrorist attack. So,
Yeah.
anyways, like jokes apart, so even like the previous week, the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said that quote, "Countries that make the gamble of normalization with Israel will lose. They're betting on a losing horse," end quote. So there were like some signs that like people hadn't paid attention to this. I mean, do note that a attack of this scale, like where I think they had like attacked like 20 settlements on the Israeli side, or kibbutz, I think as they say, would require quite extensive planning, and it was attacked through air via paragliders. They came in via fast boats uh, through the Mediterranean Sea, and also through land via motorcycles and jeeps. So this would require quite a significant amount of planning. I mean, what the reports are that Israel was distracted by the terrorist incidents in the West Bank, which have spiked over the past year, and like quite a few, like almost like 30 Israelis and 200 Palestinians have been killed in clashes with Israeli army and police. Now, violence has peaked in 2023. I think they're saying it's the deadliest year in like almost 18 years, with almost daily clashes. There have been eviction orders against Palestinian families, which have resulted in violent clashes at the Al Aqsa Mosque, which is like one of the holiest sites in Islam. The Israeli military also has escalated raids in refugee camps and battled the many of the terrorists. So this has quite the West Bank is quite active, to say the least. Um, Another point is like Hamas seems to have, like as per experts, like gone completely old school. In what I mean is like avoided electronic communication, which could be monitored by Israel especially. So they might have broken down the various subcells to for all the task into various, and then maybe they might have done more word of mouth communication versus electronic, or maybe they are using encrypted devices which is beyond the reach of the Israeli intelligence sources. Also, the electronic systems on the border on which Israel had invested $1 billion, I mean, was rendered useless. I mean, a lot of the cameras and sensors did not help stopping these attacks, because like as you saw in some of the videos, there were like electronic sensors which the Palestinian drones drop grenades and bombs and then disable them, so they were kind of blind when the attack was going in. um, Another angle what they say is that Hamas gave the try to fool the Israelis by trying to not fight. I mean, they Hamas has been pretty quiet over the last couple of years. So they're using a tactic to mislead the Israelis by giving an impression that they wanted more for the betterment of Gaza, and they were not interested in, they were not ready for a fight. Uh, Also, they had applied for a lot of work permits for Gazans to work across the border in Israel. I mean, the restraint shown by Hamas, I mean, it did draw public criticism from supporters, built an impression that Hamas had more economic concerns and not a war on its mind. So it got so bad for Hamas at one point that even the more moderate Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah group, they mocked Hamas for going quiet. I mean, which is quite a statement in itself. So, like in one Fatah statement in published in last June, the group accused Hamas leaders of fleeing to Arab capitals to live in the luxurious hotels and villas and leaving their people behind in poverty in Gaza. Now, Israel had like long prided itself to infiltrate and monitor these terrorist groups, but uh, so like Hamas did make a lot of countermeasures to avoid like I think the human intelligence was sorely lacking in this field, that they were caught completely unaware. I mean, they use quite a bit of resources. I mean, the first move, as you said, was firing a lot of rockets, and it was also coincided with incursions with fighters who flew hand gliders or motorized paragliders. They also they use bulldozers to storm down an electric monitoring fence. So they breached the fence in multiple places, and the fighters poured out of these breaches on motorbikes. So it was like very old school methods of just um, running down. And then also the commando unit, they attacked some of their Israeli army headquarters and jammed its communication. So there was a lot of chaos. I think some reports say that the Israeli units took almost 3 to 4 hours until like almost noon. Many of them were paralyzed and they weren't able to help the citizens who were desperately calling for help. Also, like there are reports, I mean, this is unconfirmed, that senior intelligence officials in Egypt had warned Israel of something big was happening from Gaza. But I think Israel focused on the West Bank and downplayed the Gaza situation. I mean, um there are also reports that Israel might have gotten too confident in its technological sophistication that it got lulled into a false sense of security. Um, I think one of the things was like Andrew Exum in one of the articles in I believe the Atlantic, he says like that Israel has an excellent air force, special ops, but it's like conventional units is made lot of large. I'm paraphrasing here, made up of conscripts which are neither well trained or nor well disciplined by American standards. So they basically, he means to say that the conscript militaries, they always have changing of there's always change because they're like people who are coming in and coming out. So the turnover is too high to develop proficiency in like many military tasks. And also a lot of these conventional forces were deployed in the West Bank, fighting the daily incidents of rioting and terrorism, and they lightly guarded the Gaza border. Now, the Gaza border was an electronic monitored fence, so it lulled them into a false sense of security that they don't need enough deployment at the Gaza border versus West Bank, which was technically more hot and active. So some of the deployments moved to West Bank, which kind of gave like the terrorists a free run when they entered. Uh, the southern part of Israel. Now there will be like a lot of investigations as to what happened and why they were like missed. Why was there not enough human intelligence? Why did the electronic counter espionage fail? I mean, some people say that basically there's never, it was just like a, I mean, they're calling it Israel's 9/11, where there is a failure of imagination, that the signs were there but they failed to connect the dots. Just like the 9/11 commission said, there was a failure of imagination to connect the dots. I mean, the pieces of intelligence was there, but they weren't able to connect it all together. So, and then the last report that we just read was the Axios had an article that Israeli intelligence did finally see some signs of Hamas activity in Gaza the night before the attack. And there were some consultations to see whether they should forward deploy or change the deployment. But by the time they decided to move, it was like too late. They did move little some forces, but it wasn't enough. And uh, this lack of preparation, the lack of counter resilience, the lack of imagination all came to bite back Israel very heavily in the end. So I think there will be a lot of soul searching in the Israeli defense community. I mean Mossad. I mean, if you look at all the literature out there, or if you see any movies or TV shows, or like the Fauda, like the series, like they have gained a sort of mythical status in terms of like they're the best in the world, they're the top of the top, the cream de la creme in like counterintelligence espionage, and this would be like a big blot on their record, and this will bring them down to earth, like kind of in a some way, shape, or form, that even they are prone to making mistakes. But yeah, I mean, this would be, I think that's because I mean, like over 1,000 people dead and the attacks in 20 different places means that it has to be like a lot of signals being missed. It just can't be like, I mean, a lone wolf attack is pretty hard to predict, and you cannot, but when you are such a large group of attackers, then there has to be some kind of communication back and forth. So there has to be a lot of dots being not connected and missed, and they would have to revamp their security and intelligence too. And there'll also be lessons learned, which I'll come to later for like the Indian situation. So Kishore.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you hit the nail on the head where you pointed out that the aura built around the
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Israeli counter-intelligence capability came crashing down. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, one picture that will remain with me for a long, long time is how when these attacks were happening and how the Hamas terrorists were busy taking down one defense base
Mm-hmm.
at a different defense base. The Israelis
Mm-hmm.
were busy trying to shift their fighter jets away to safer location.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of uh, epitomized the chaos around that day, that moment, that day.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody seemed to be in control. Nobody seemed to be uh, in the know of what was really happening. Anyway, so now we can actually look at why all this happened, and one major reason why it happened. One major reason why it happened was that the Israeli domestic politics itself seems to be in some kind of a turmoil. We all know that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has kind of had a nth inning. I've kind of lost count of how many times has he come back from political sannyas, and this time around, I think he is now uh, again leading a multi-party coalition, a center-right coalition, and to avoid getting arrested, to avoid getting being put behind bars, he is somehow trying to do some kind of judicial reform, and that has not gone down well with the average Israeli on the street, and therefore the opposition and also the people have been gathering have been gathering in Jerusalem, trying to protest the judicial reform, and that has kind of split the Israeli society right down the middle, and that is where the entire focus has been for the Israeli government in the past year and a half. Now, Hebrew University professor Dmitry Shumsky had written provocatively that for years, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had developed and advanced a destructive, warped political doctrine that held that strengthening Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority would be good for Israel. However, this approach divided the Palestinians, undermined the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and made it easy for Netanyahu to claim that there was no path to a Palestinian state. The purpose of the doctrine was to perpetuate the rift between Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. This way, it would preserve the diplomatic paralysis and forever remove the danger of negotiations with the Palestinians over the partition of Israel into two states on the argument that the Palestinian Authority does not represent all the Palestinians. Now, in an interview with the Ynet news website on May 5, 2019, Netanyahu associate Gershon Hakochen, a major general in reserves, had said, and I quote him, "We need to tell the truth. Netanyahu's strategy is to prevent the option of two states. So he is turning Hamas into his closest partner. Openly, Hamas is an enemy. Covertly, it is an ally," unquote. Now, at the same time, in 2019, in a tweet, Channel 13 had quoted Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak saying, and I quote again, "Netanyahu is not interested in a two-state solution. Rather, he wants to separate Gaza from the West Bank, as he told me at the end of 2010, unquote. Mubarak said this during an interview with the Kuwaiti daily Al Anba. Now, thanks to the funneling of millions of Qatari dollars to Gaza, with Netanyahu's repeated approval as part of a deliberate and malicious policy aimed at nothing other than burying the two-state solution, Hamas had gone on to acquire inordinate military capabilities within a relatively short time. And this resulted in the current situation, which has now taken the lives of more than 1,000 Israelis. Again, Netanyahu's proposed overhaul of the judiciary roiled the Israeli society, as I told earlier, leading to massive public protests. Hundreds of essential military reservists pledged to refuse to show up for duty if the overhaul passed. Investigators must now ask whether this domestic turmoil weakened Israeli deterrence not only by influencing enemy perceptions but also by eroding Israel's actual intelligence capabilities and military readiness. The Netanyahu government was pursuing a policy premised on the notion that it could ignore the Palestinian issue and make a deal directly with the Gulf Arab states, who had now become increasingly nervous about Iran's rise in the region and were eager to tie up with Israel's booming technology driven economy. The assumptions behind that strategy exploded late last week. So now, could this be a strategic move by Hamas aimed to tell the international community that we alone decide for Palestine? Now, that is a real possibility. At the end of the day, while it is true that the Palestinian Authority is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Authority's influence has always been limited compared with that of Hamas. It is the unfortunate reality that in the failed states of this part of the world, illegitimate armed representatives like Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the Houthis in Yemen will always have the upper hand. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority has no choice but to support Hamas in order to avoid further internal Palestinian friction. Therefore, it can only be perceived as even weaker globally. However, here are the cons of Hamas's most recent adventure. It gives Netanyahu a way out of his internal political turmoil at a rare moment when even members of their own Israeli military were opposing him. Now it is a full scale war to protect Israel and rescue the kidnapped soldiers and civilians. So it is now a case of all hands on deck. It also further empowers his right wing coalition at a time when the world has been trying to convince them to back down and tempt them with peace proposals. Late in December 2022, Israel inaugurated its most far right and religious government, led by Netanyahu and his Likud party. This coalition government included two ultra Orthodox parties and three far right parties, such as the religious Zionist Party, affiliated with the West Bank settler movement. Netanyahu made various concessions to secure a governing majority, drawing criticism for prioritizing the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which now undermines the prospects for a two-state solution. Iran appears to be engaged in a three-stage process. A. Weaken Fatah, B. Providing an alternate model for Palestinian action, and C. Pushing Hamas forward as an organization that can ultimately become become the principal representative of the Palestinian people. So, what Hamas gains will be a loss to Fatah, which finds itself more and more beleaguered from all sides. And it's difficult to see how Fatah will now emerge from this predicament, especially if Palestinian elections are eventually held again. Okay, so that is about the domestic political compulsion within Israel that may have contributed to the situation that we see today. But more importantly for us, let's also look at it from an Indian perspective, from an Indian angle, and see how we can learn our lessons from what happened out there in Israel. Mohal, you want to elaborate on that now?
Yeah, so post these events, the Director General of the NSG, M.A. Ganpati, was asked about the events in Israel. So he emphasized the importance of human element and the skilled personnel in counterterrorism efforts. He also said that in the wake of the terror attack in Israel, India needs to have a crisis management response framework at the national level on extreme terrorist scenarios. He said that despite the technological advancements, it is man and the weapon which makes the final difference. I think this is something we also brought up that, I mean, see, Israel built up $1 billion fence, right, with a lot of
Yeah.
electronic surveillance, but actually it's the boots on the ground which will what makes a difference in the end is the boots on the ground. I mean, there is no easy substitute for boots on the ground. I mean, electronic and cyber can be a force multiplier, no doubt, in the modern world technological era. But in absence, I mean, you are asking for like trouble. I mean, as you see in Israel, $1 billion fence, which was lightly manned, was destroyed by a bulldozer within minutes, creating a gap through which the Hamas fighters poured into southern Israel. As I said earlier, the electronic surveillance posts were disabled via bombs and grenades released by drones, so hampering the visibility. So if you I mean, there's never like a apples to apples comparison to the Indian scenario, but let's say in Jammu and Kashmir, which has seen a prolonged stretch of normalcy post the revocation of Article 370. Now, direct rule from center like Delhi with JNK being now branded as a union territory, or sorry, as a converted as a union territory, has led in many cases strict action against like folks who didn't desire normalcy in the state and who were like not wanting normalcy, and they always wanted to have agitation and riots and trouble in the valley. So these people have been put under control now, but this peace should not lull the security forces into a false sense of security, and we always have to keep our eyes out and the guard up. I mean, with national elections coming up in 6 months time in India, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that Pakistan might provoke India with some sort of spectacular terrorist attack. I mean, one just has to look at the just before, like couple of months before the last general election in 2019, we had the Pulwama tragedy where like 50 plus CRPF jawans lost their lives in a vehicle-based suicide bombing. So these just bring the challenges that uh, we have to be cognizant of. Also, I think as Andrew Exum said, like lot of the some of the issues, obviously such a large failure is a combination of multiple factors. One was the conscripts. So they don't have a like a all volunteer force. I mean, because Israel has a very small population, but like India in comparison has a much larger population. Now we have this Agniveer scheme because it is to reduce the the pension bill and the expenses of the salaries, because the it's growing exponentially post OROP. So to keep it in, to have more money left over for like capex expenditure, maybe they introduce the Agniveer scheme where soldiers will serve for like 4 years, and then they a certain percent, I was forget, like I think it's 25 50% will retire and the rest will remain in the army. So eventually I think, and this is something that retired Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar brought up in his recent podcast, that by middle of next decade, as per his calculations, and which he said like nobody's been able to challenge him on, uh, 50% of the fighting force, the main fighting force, so this is not the senior officers, like the junior folks will be composed of Agniveer. So now eventually, like we don't want to be, India doesn't want to be caught up like maybe a decade from now, because of the high churn or turnover in terms of the fighting men being Agniveers. Then we don't want to be in a situation where like the lack of training and expertise is lost as the churn occurs with a new batch of Agniveers constantly. So this is also something, I mean, it's not a short-term thing, but over the years, we don't want to be like have a high percentage of I wouldn't say conscript force, but a churning force, you know. So that's another point. Now, coming to the political angle, I mean, Prime Minister Modi has strongly condemned the terror attacks and made it clear that India stands in solidarity with Israel. Now, but in contrast, the Congress Working Committee, the Indian National Congress Committee, I mean, expressed its quote dismay and anguish unquote over the war, and underlined its support for the Palestinian people's right to land and self-government and to live with dignity and respect, end quote. So now, see, like recently in the last podcast, we had praised the Congress party, which has been a lot of criticism from BJP and many folks about its foreign policy, which is kind of perplexing at times, like where they take like strange stands, and they were at least in unison pushing back against Justin Trudeau and the soft support for Khalistanis, like which we praised the Congress party for. But again, this is like maybe that was the outlier, and this is like reversion to the mean, where again they didn't harshly criticize Hamas for the terrorist attacks where like over 1,000 people lost their lives, and it was more about Palestinian causes. I mean, this could very well be a statement from, let's say, a Middle Eastern country versus like the main opposition party in India, which is kind of contrasting to the other political parties in the West, you know. So, I mean, critics of PM Modi have said that, oh, he's making strong statements because of his anti-minority stance. But like, see, many people are missing the overall picture. Modi has continued the Indian policy of a two-state solution, which has been going on from probably like the first Prime Minister Nehru, I would say.
Yes.
So, but the thing that has changed is like during the Modi years, we had the first president, I mean, sorry, the first presidential visit by an Indian president, like the late Pranab Mukherjee, who visited Ramallah in the West Bank in 2015. I think he entered from the Israeli side. And then subsequently in 2018, Prime Minister Modi himself visited Ramallah, I believe, from the Jordanian side.
From Jordan,
and he on record reiterated the support for the two-state solution. So it's not like that, because like in some people's mind that, oh, Modi is against like minorities or Muslims, like he's not supporting Palestine, he's supporting Israel at the moment. It's just like people want to just make a cheap political point and not look at the overall, like across governments, BJP, Congress, we had Janata Dal prime ministers, like they all have supported the two-state solution. But I mean, in times of such a ghastly attack where so many people, innocent people, have lost their lives, the prime minister chooses to make a stand where that we stand with Israel because of uh, the barbaric nature of the attack. Now, also remember, like India many times has voted against Israeli resolutions against Palestine, but at the same time also has abstained from resolutions which are brought up by many countries in the Middle East against Israel. So it's kind of we do this balancing act. So I know like some foreign policy commentators like Derek Grossman, I mean from United States, I say like, oh, India's policy might become more delicate today. I think it was always delicate to begin with. I mean, it's a continuing balance. I mean, we do support the two-state solution, which is pro-Palestine position, but when we denounce this terrorist attack, which is like a pro-Israeli position. So, I mean, just like as we saw in Ukraine, I think it's just a delicate balancing act we need to constantly doing. I mean, that's like what we call uh, the independent foreign policy that we propose. Sorry, I can't remember the word right now.
Strategic autonomy.
Yeah, strategic autonomy. Say thank you. So the strategic autonomy that I mean, it's like on a vast variety of issues. Like you could be. I mean, sorry, I'm digressing here, but like on a climate change, you could agree with China, but then on freedom of navigation of seas, you could agree with US against China, but on
Yeah.
climate change, you would agree with China against US. So I mean, it's just like I mean, as Foreign Minister Jay Shankar, when he was, I think, Foreign Secretary, I think he did mention it like issue-based alignment. So,
Mhm.
so Kishore.
Yep. Yep. And I think just to add to your point, the Indian angle, uh, Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Modi profusely for
Yeah.
calling him and also extending support. So that was an interesting development. Now, the other point was I totally agree with you when Congress kind of missed the crux of the context, telling not condemning the terror attack. I think that was something that they should have done. Uh, it's okay to stand with reiterating your stand for an independent Palestine, which time and again always gets the limelight. But I think this was not the time for that. I think this was more a time to
Mm-hmm.
denounce the terror attack, and I think Congress missed a trick there. But anyway, we'll leave it there. Now, in addition, I think we now have a situation where uh, most of the Western capitals are now siding with Israel, and most of the Islamic capitals are now siding with Palestine. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
again becoming a global issue where the split is wide open right in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and this will continue to manifest in multiple forms, possibly in the United Nations Security Council as well. A
Mm-hmm.
General Assembly also, we might have a vote. So I think all that will happen. There might be some kind of arm twisting the Israelis to stop their invasion of Gaza. So I think all that will happen. So internationally also there might be quite a bit of uh, behind the curtains kind of scenario where they will try to cut down on the violence as such. And Israel, for on their part, I think they cannot be seen to be weak now. So I think
Mm-hmm.
overtly they will not agree to anything
Yeah.
other than continuing their attack. So if somebody tells them to back off, Israel will not agree to that kind of a demand. But I think behind the curtains, there might still be some exit ramp for Israel as well, wherein uh, Hamas will have to give up on their military capability one way or the other. And I think that is the kind of negotiated settlement that might be on the card. But this is too early to guess what that will be. But yeah, things will take that path as well in the near future. Mohal?
Yeah. So I mean, in conclusion, I mean, we just saw this cross the news wire that, I mean, as we're recording on early morning, uh, I believe it's like little past 1 out there in India on
Saturday.
14th
Yeah.
of Saturday,
Mm.
14th of October. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says that Israel's counteroffensive in Gaza is, quote, only the beginning, end quote.
Mm. Mm.
So, I mean, it's like a fast moving events. I mean, as we record, by the time you listeners listen to it, things might have moved along, but this is the latest on early morning on Saturday, October 14th. So, see, this violence is like bound to continue as Israel will look to take revenge on what was the worst day of killings of Jews since World War II, which is
Yes.
like quite something in that. I mean, it's almost certain at this point that Gaza is bound to be flattened quite a bit with Israeli airstrikes. I mean, they already asked the northern part to vacate, which is kind of uh, really hard on the citizens because I mean Gaza is just like 365 square kilometers now. Let's say even if you take half of it theoretically, like for 1 million people to move within 180 square kilometers with the amount of density, it's kind of like pretty hard on the citizens. And I mean the airstrikes is bound to kill like more civilians, which is going to create a new cycle of violence where the Palestinians whose family members and loved or dear ones are killed are going to pick up arms and wanting to fight the Israelis, and the Israelis will suffer more terrorist attacks, which will
Yeah.
mean like more reprisal attacks. So, I mean, this is unfortunately the civilians on both sides are going to get crushed very badly in this. Now, Israel has mostly avoided going into Gaza since they left in 2006, but the sheer scale of attacks means they are left with lot little choice. I mean, but like the thing is like fighting in a high dense urban environment. I mean, Gaza is like one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Means that the Israeli military advantage in terms of military hardware is kind of negated because, I mean, for example, like if you have to take a tank in those narrow gullies where they could be hit with an anti-tank missile or even an RPG from all kinds of angles. So it's going to be very hard for them to fight. And like Hamas, because I mean, this is not going to be a surprise attack by the IDF. So they're going to be ready, and it's going to be a very bloody and long campaign where not only civilians will be unfortunately losing their lives, but also a lot of soldiers from both sides or fighting men are going to lose their lives. So it's going to be a very bloody campaign. I mean, as we've seen in the Iraq war in like Mosul or like some of those
Mm. Mm.
city-based campaigns, it takes a heavy toll on the soldiers, and it's going to be like a not pretty sight at all. I mean, also to remember, like a major complication is it's not just going in and destroying all the Hamas fighters. A major complication is there approximately there are like around 100 hostages as per the recent reports by Bloomberg. Now, some of these also are like foreign citizens. So, I mean, these are bound to be used as human shields by Hamas. But the problem is, let's say, if there was a foreign citizen like a US, and if Israeli strike or attack kills one of the foreign citizens, it creates like complications in relations of Israel with, let's say, a Western country.
Yep.
So, it is going to be like very tricky that while trying to kill Hamas, like you might accidentally even kill like hostages, which might be innocent women and children, unfortunately. Now, a prisoner exchange also is going to be hard because if you remember, like in I mean, if you go back in history, like Gilad Shalit, an IDF soldier who was kidnapped in 2006, after 5 long years in captivity, he was exchanged for like 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. So like 1 for 1,000 was exchanged. Now, there are unconfirmed rumors that, I mean, this could be fake news for all we know, that Hamas might want their folks lodged in foreign prisons to be exchanged for the hostages. So it is kind of tricky that the Israelis just can't go all guns blazing in there because there could be a ton of hostages which are bound to be used as human shields against the attack. I mean, so I mean the Abraham Records. So moving on to the Abraham Accords, now they had shown some promise that there was a possibility that we could move beyond this never ending cycle of clashes between Israel and Palestine. But I mean, this attack has undone years of hard diplomatic work, and it will take some time before both sides, the Israelis and the Middle Eastern powers, can come back to the table. The solution, even if it's, I mean, it's like next to impossible in this time and day after this ghastly attacks, has to be, say, a political one, not a military. I mean, Israel could use all its military forces on Palestine and still you're not going to eliminate all the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad terrorists out there, and vice versa. however hard Hamas and all the terrorist groups try, like Israel is not going to cease to exist, which is one of their demand of them. Now, back in the 90s, late 90s, both sides were close to a settlement, but some thorny issues remain with like the status of Jerusalem. So eventually, I think if they want to resolve it and stop this endless cycle of fighting, there has to be some give and take on both sides for a final settlement. Now, Netanyahu's present government, due to the it including members of the far right, have turned to a hard right in terms of politics. I mean, they have expanded the settlements in the West Bank,
True.
which has been a constant source of resentment with the Palestinians. So, like, Netanyahu tried to push for a de facto one state solution by giving an implicit support to Hamas to weaken the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. But I think it's kind of spectacularly backfired on him. Now, the question is whether he will take the fall as Golda Meir did post the failure to prepare for the 1973 Yom Kippur, where only time will tell. I mean, he's literally, like, as I say, like a cat. He has like more lives than a cat, like who has 9 lives. So, but with the question is, even with the splintering of the political leadership Palestinian between Hamas in Gaza and Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, even if, let's say, negotiations were held, like, not anytime soon, but like in the distant future, I mean, Israel wouldn't even know whom to negotiate with because there's two
Yeah.
separate entities. So it is kind of next to impossible that so like even like Netanyahu pushing the envelope has like backfired on him. And I mean, there has to be some kind of a resolution eventually. But let's see. I mean, the immediate future looks like bleak on both sides for like civilians and everybody involved. Kishore?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, one last dimension that I quickly wanted to talk about how this will manifest across the world capital. Like, for example, France now saying that Hamas, categorically saying that Hamas is a terror organization and you cannot be seen as supporting them. However, there were large rallies taken out in Paris. So I think, in a way, these were reminiscent of the post Charlie Hebdo protest that we saw in Paris. So I think what we saw in Israel and in Gaza can now easily spill over across the region and also possibly to other parts of the world as well. Yes, you rightly pointed out that this looked like a 9/11 moment for Israel. Now, just like how President George Bush said famously that day, categorically, that you're either with us or with the terrorists, Israel also will want to make similar statements. You're either with us or with the terrorists. Now, that will hardly leave any room for any nuanced positions, and that is where things can go awry when there are any attempts for negotiated settlement. I think also all these countries around, they will try to urge Palestine, Palestinians and the Israelis to stop violence of all forms and try to get to the negotiation table. But Israel, I think, is currently no mood to do that. So yeah, let's see how things pan out.
And I mean, I just saw this cross the news where that sources with knowledge have told a reporter that the US has urged Israel to delay its ground operations in Gaza until safe passage for Palestinians can be secured. So this is kind of complicates, like, where US wants them to take action against Hamas, but not uh,
Not
before the
right away. Mm.
so I mean, it's just like a fast and moving I mean, also if you think of it, like, it's not that Gaza is surrounded by Israel and also there's also one border opening with Egypt, but
With
Egypt
Egypt,
has
yeah,
constantly refused to open. So it's like kind of ironical that Egypt, like, which kinds to sympathies with the Palestinian cause, won't open that border crossing to let refugees into its own country, where uh where they are, like, if they are boxed in by Israel and the Mediterranean Sea, there's at least an outlet wall where they can be let into Egypt. But Egypt also is not refusing to cooperate, which kind of increases the hardship on the Palestinian people. And I think there's the Palestinian sources. I think they're like around probably like around like a 1900 people dead in them. So
The
yeah, I mean,
numbers are rising even in
yeah, the numbers
Gaza.
are rising. I mean, even in the Gaza, and like it's bound to go up, as and now US has thrown this wrench in the Israeli plans. And then also we haven't talked. I mean, we did talk about the hostages, but I don't know how the hostages will figure into this. And there's so many different countries, so many people might want to secure their hostages before the Israelis launch the attack. So it's kind of very fluid and ever-changing situation, and we'll have to see in the days to come how it all pans out.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about the Syrian connection to all this. We heard reports of Israel bombing both the airports in Damascus and Aleppo.
Yeah, but like
To
Syria, they bomb almost every year. I mean,
they do, but this time around there was
yeah.
an
I-
aircraft of Iran
I-
trying to land there. So I think
yeah, yeah.
that way Israel ever closer to fighting a direct fight with Iran.
Yeah, but I mean, the
That
Lebanon also, there were like reports, and I mean, the Hezbollah, and like they might also open up another front. But I mean, if they would have opened it, they would have opened it by now. I mean, uh, they wouldn't have waited one whole week to open that new front. I mean, you never say
yeah
never in like situation like Middle East, but I think they might just be kind of not targeting, but I would say like trying to trigger like kind of some kind of conflict, but not actively going for a looking for a whole scale war, you know.
yeah. Okay, I think that wraps up today's topic. Listeners, to continue hearing about such interesting topics, do subscribe to our channel, India Rising, wherever you are listening to us. If you are listening to us on YouTube, do press the bell icon to get notifications about our upcoming episodes. If you have not left us a review, we urge you to do so, as it helps other listeners like you in finding us. We would also like to hear from you if you have any suggestions on any topics that you would like us to cover. Do remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy. Until the next time, this is Mohal and Kishor signing off.